Hi, I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is Not Just Cute, the podcast, where we discuss all kinds of topics to help bridge the gap that exists between what we know and what we do in early childhood education. We're starting conversations with academics, authors, decision makers, educators, and parents so that together we can improve the quality of early childhood education while at the same time protecting and respecting the childhood experience. Rae Pica has been a fierce advocate for children and childhood for over 40 years. And during that time, she's written a whole bookshelf, maybe even two, full of books on the topic. Today, she's sharing her latest addition to that bookshelf. It just came out last week, and it's called Why Play? How to Make Play an Essential Part of Early Education. In this newest book, Rae dives into the importance of play in early childhood education, how to partner with parents, why different modes of play are beneficial, and how to support each type of play. She even touches on some of the tricky topics associated with play, like rough and tumble play and gun play. It's her latest and quite possibly her greatest, and she's sharing it with us in today's episode. You can find this episode's show notes, which are always full of links, tidbits, and resources at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 77. Before we jump in, a quick reminder that this is the perfect time to share more about the importance of play through the Why We Play parent letters. You can check them out and grab a free sample letter by going to notjustcute.com/why we play. As I've said over and over, people don't value what they don't understand. So let's do our best to help others understand and value play. The Why We Play letters were written to help you do just that. Grab your free sample letter today at notjustcute.com/why we play. I always enjoy my conversations with Rae, and I'm certain that you're going to enjoy this too. If you want to know how to better advocate for play in early childhood, this episode is for you. Let's jump in. Rae Pica, it is always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Amanda. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
I should say I'm actually never surprised when I get an email from you saying that you have a new book. You're so prolific. So tell us a little bit about this new book and why it felt like time for this book now.
Well, I was approached by Teachers College Press. I had no intention of writing another one because I just had one come out. But it was Teachers College Press, and I
Right.
hadn't written for them before, and very impressive, and they promised marketing help and,
Mm-hmm.
some good stuff that I hadn't gotten before. So I percolated on it. They wanted me to write about play, and I thought, well, I've got some wonderful books about play right here in my office, and do we need another one? And apparently the answer was yes. Um, I mean, it just boggles the mind. I just can't believe I have to say these words, but play is going the way of the dinosaur, for young children. So we need to do as much as we can. And when I finally came up with, the concept that was different from the other books here in my office, I said, okay, I will do it. And I do love to write, Amanda.
And you're very talented at it. It seems to come easily to you. Does it actually come easily to you, or is it just that you've built the muscle and so it looks easy to other people?
I think building the muscle is a good way to think about it. Yeah, this is my 23rd.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm old now, so I've been at it for a long time. But yeah, getting started is always hard for
Mm.
anything. I mean, if I'm creating a webinar or something, it's, that starting, and the only solution to that is to start, and it makes the butterflies go away. Um, but yeah, I mean, it does come much more easily now than it
Mm.
did in the past. And of course, now we have tools that occasionally make me pull my hair out, like the internet. Um, that we didn't have before. I used to, although I loved being in the library, at a table surrounded by big, fat, juicy books and with my notebook open and my pen. And, I mean, I have very nostalgic feelings about that. But I also remember, because I am old, the very first book I had published when the editor's suggested changes came back, I had to start typing all over again because there was no delete, copy, and paste and all of that good
Right.
stuff that we have now. I had to type the whole manuscript over again, which is, not very nostalgic about that.
No, I'm sure not.
So the name of the book is called Why Play, which unfortunately is a question that needs to be answered.
Mhm.
And what's the subtitle? I
How to
always
make play an essential part of early education.
Thank you. I always have
Yeah.
trouble with subtitles.
It's perfect. So why play? How to make play an essential part of early education. And we were talking before that you and I could talk about this for a long time. We're both very passionate about play. And I know a lot of the people who are listening also are passionate about play and have their own
Yeah.
answer, but I want to hear your answer. Again, like you said, there are other books out there about play, but I think why we need so many is because it takes all these unique voices and perspectives. So what is your personal perspective on why we need play?
Because it's what nature intended is the simplest, shortest answer I can give you. It's
Hmm.
what nature intended for young children. It's what nature intended for the species, the young of all species, including the human species, to
Hmm.
learn and to grow, to develop and physically and socially, emotionally and cognitively. It and people just either never knew that or seem to have forgotten it,
Hmm.
and the people in charge of policy who are making decisions either never knew it or don't care to know it. They are ignoring all of the research, and it's enormously frustrating.
And I do feel like we've really, I tell people all the time, the research is on our side. We just need to get
Yes,
familiar with it and get better at articulating it. And eventually they can't turn away whoever the they is, right? The powers that be, decision makers, parents, administrators, whoever it is at the moment, if we can get really clear about the research and articulate it, eventually there's no denying it. So, what do you think are some of the misconceptions that are out there that are getting in the way of this understanding?
well, the biggest one you've probably heard me talk about before, because I'm always babbling on and on about it, is that myth that earlier is better. We've been consumed by the belief. It's mostly in this country, but I'm hearing it from other countries as well, that we have to get the little ones, productive and accountable and I mean, productivity, should not be and accomplished should not be words we use in early childhood. But there's this belief that if we don't get them started, especially, in academics and also in athletics, as early as humanly possible, that they will fall behind and have unsuccessful, miserable lives. And nothing could be further from the truth. We're doing the opposite of
Hmm.
what they need. We're making them miserable and we're not turning out creative children, creative adults. We're not turning out problem solvers and happy individuals, because they don't have the chance to play.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And I think that that mentality of earlier is better. And like you said, the efficiency. Two thoughts that I keep coming back to. One is that we have to remember that development does not work top down. It's like building a house starting at the top and going down, right? That
Exactly.
we can't we can't install the door sooner than we've put in the foundation. It just doesn't make sense.
That's funny because I use that, like I said, we wouldn't put the second floor or even the first floor
Right.
on until we have the foundation.
It needs to be
Yeah,
solid. And sometimes I feel like if we sometimes I like to turn the tables and use some of that language that feels out of place. And I've actually said, actually playing is efficient. If we want to talk about being more efficient, play is so much more efficient in helping children to work on multiple objectives developmentally at the same time because it's more natural that way. It's more efficient because like you said, it's the way that they're wired to learn. So let's work with the current, right? So that it can be more efficient. So sometimes I think we can flip that script and say, okay, I hear you saying earlier is better. You're worried about falling behind. Let me show you why play is actually very efficient, very productive. We just need to be
Yes.
able to see it, right? That
Yes.
we're measuring with the wrong standards
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah. A lot of parents think that worksheets, provide evidence of what their
Hmm.
children are learning. What they learn through play, we can't also see the evidence of, right?
It's
It's
hard to
the
put
same
it in a
thing.
backpack, right?
Yes, yes. And, creativity, imagination, joy, all those things aren't measurable, they're not quantifiable. Yeah. Um, that's just another myth that play is not productive.
Hmm.
Playtime is not productive time, and heaven forbid children should have any downtime. Honest to goodness, I just got a text from someone who will remain nameless, whose daughter's in first grade, and she wanted to know if worksheets were okay for math for first graders. And then she sent me a copy of this thing that the teacher sends home that says um keep an extra set of flashcards in your car so that you can practice. And I'm thinking, can we just leave the children alone to do what they want to do? If you've got to subject them to flashcards in the classroom, okay, not that I approve, but but just let them play after they get out of school. I mean, it's why? Why do we have to be quizzing them in the car too?
Well, and we have to remind ourselves that if we're trying to continually push things into all the crevices, I always say if you're pushing something down, you're pushing something out. And
Ah,
so, if they're pushing flashcards into the car and at dinner time and bath time and bedtime and every other time, we have to stop and say, well, we can't just push it in without considering what we're pushing out. And what we're pushing out is conversation, the
yes,
creative thinking that you were talking about, the
yes,
relationships that are so
yes.
important in development. And so we've really got to get people aware, I guess, to recognize that it's you can't just keep pushing in or pushing down without pushing something out. And
That's
some of
just
those
a
things that
good
we're
point.
pushing out are so essential.
Absolutely essential, critical. I mean, we just think about problem solving alone. They say that we don't even know many of the careers today's 4-year-olds will have, right?
Absolutely.
So when we talk about preparing them for adulthood and making them, college and career ready, well, we don't know much of what they're going to need to know. But the one thing we can say for certain is they will need problem solving skills.
Hmm.
And they learn those through play.
Hmm.
They don't learn them by memorizing what's on a worksheet. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's um
Well, and you going in that same lane, you mentioned creativity before, and I harp on this all the time that creativity is so important and it is so well supported by play. But I think sometimes what people hear is creativity is important because we need artists,
Yep,
and we do, and that's
yep,
great. But what I remind them is that every successful person has done something differently than it's ever been done before, right? So
exactly.
our very best doctors, our very best teachers, our very best politicians, our very best scientists, I mean, fill in whatever profession is because they saw something differently or they encountered a problem that had never been known before or was thought to have no answer. They looked at
Right.
it differently and they did something differently. They were good problem solvers and they were creative thinkers, just like you said. And those are key to play
Yes.
and pretty much lost on worksheets,
Oh,
right?
completely lost on worksheets, yeah. I used to, in my workshops a long time ago, ask participants to write down words that, came to mind when I said play, and I don't know which order I did it in, and write down words that come to mind when I say creativity. And there was so much overlap,
Hmm.
between the two. Um, and creativity and problem solving do go hand in hand. I mean, like you say, we do tend to associate creativity with the artist alone. Um, but we need creativity in science, in business, in technology, in medicine, and problem solving. I mean, as long as there are humans on Earth, there will always be problems to solve, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, if children only know how to follow directions
Hmm.
and do as they're told, this is not a skill that just suddenly appears because, they've matured physically.
Hmm.
You have to start instilling these things in them when they're young. To me, that's what being ready for school looks like, is, letting them grow and develop as nature intended. Yeah. Well, we could rant and rave all day long. I'm not sure it makes enough difference, but we try.
We try. Well, one of the things I loved as I looked over the summary of your book and some of its contents is that you jump into some of these tricky topics around play as well.
Yeah.
And so I want to jump into some of those. And one that I heard just recently, I was teaching a workshop and we had a similar conversation. They had the question, what about rough and tumble play? What should I do about rough and tumble play in an early childhood classroom? Shouldn't I just stop it? Is kind of the feeling they have. And if not, why would we allow this rough and tumble type of play?
Yeah, each chapter, there are 12 chapters in the book, and each one is dedicated to a different type of play. And my idea was to advocate for each of these 12 types of play. Um, give the teachers the information that they need, and then there's a section, and I know we'll talk about parents later, but there's a section in each chapter called Partnering with Parents so that we can help advocate with the parents too. So anyway,
Hmm.
I'm getting ahead of myself. Rough and tumble is one of two types, well, three types of play that are, I think, to be avoided at all costs, because we imagine the children getting hurt. And we've gone a little overboard with
Hmm.
our protectiveness of children. I use the example of a little boy called Clark, that I lived next door to. He was 6 or 7 when I moved in. And, broken bones, bloodied body parts. I mean, the whole thing. And it was just a rite of passage. Today, I mean, it just wouldn't even be allowed. We can't allow them to hurt themselves. Anyway, rough and tumble is something, again, seen in most species, and the young of most species. It just comes naturally to them. We do tend to think of it more in terms of boys, but girls also. Mike Huber, in his book, which I can't remember the name of it, talked about, the girls often being the ones who say, let's bring out the tumbling mats, and want to get in there. For boys, it's one of the only societally, is that a word, sanctioned ways that they can experience touch. Touch
Hmm.
is so important for young children, and boys don't get enough of it. When they engage in rough and tumble play, they learn about boundaries.
Hmm.
They learn how hard can I touch without it hurting? How um where is the line between fun and something that's hurtful or harmful?
Hmm.
And it's relatively easy to see for a
Yeah.
teacher. You know, if the children are laughing and smiling, we're good.
Uh-huh.
If someone is complaining or crying or looks like he or she is in pain, then we need to intervene. But otherwise, we shouldn't worry.
And that's one of the skills that children get from that rough and tumble play. That's one of the things we talked about was that when we teach children to pay attention to their friends, look at your friend's face. Is he enjoying this right now? Then that's a
Yes.
huge social skill for them to learn. And just like you said, that boundary of how much is too much and how far can I push this, that balancing act that they have to live in their lives,
Yes,
right? That social awareness that they need to pick
absolutely.
up is it's just an amazing way for them to learn it. And one of the pieces of research I found really interesting when you mentioned animals, that they do a lot of rough and tumble play. And I
They
remember
do.
reading some research saying that initially scientists thought that this rough and tumble play was preparing them as predators, right? It was part of training them. It was rough and tumble play so that they would learn how to go get their prey type of thing. And then they realized that it really wasn't about getting food, that even animals that didn't need to, that were fed and cared for and didn't need to get their prey, that it actually was related to their social standing and their social skills, because it goes back to what you said, that they had learned how to interact appropriately, how to read the room basically,
Yeah.
and how to interact in those ways that help them to be socially successful, more so than it was related to any kind of hunting skills, or the actual, that this rough and tumble play wasn't training them for violence like we tend to think as
No.
humans, right? That it was actually training them to be socially successful and socially aware.
Yeah, I'm having different images pop into my mind as I'm listening to you. I mean, one is of pandas, baby pandas. I mean, they're always tumbling over
I
one
was going to say they
another.
put the tumble in rough and tumble, don't they?
Yes, they do. They do. And we would never imagine, separating them and telling them, no, you can't do that. We wouldn't do that, to a pile of puppies or kittens. I mean, that's what they do. It's just instinctive, and it's instinctive in the children too. And then when you talked about reading faces, I think about Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, who could not tell what someone was feeling. And I mean, yeah, he's a character on TV, but there are people like that who don't know what someone is feeling by the expression on their face. So rough and tumble play is definitely
Right.
something that prepares them for that.
Absolutely. And that social awareness, I think, is just becoming more and more important as we become a little disconnected in
Hmm.
society. Just the
Hmm.
opportunity to actually see and read a person's face. I mean, we
Yeah.
talked earlier that this, even this interview, I don't use video in the interviews, but I use it as we talk, because it's that
Yes.
social referencing. We want to be able to see each other. And I think it's easy for us to underestimate how important that is for children, that it's actually a practiced and learned skill to learn how to physically interact, to visually interact, and
Yes.
be in
Yes.
each other's space.
When we think about early childhood education and care, it's all the emphasis is on the science of reading and academics and standards and even tests and all those things that have to be passed. But what's the most important thing in early childhood education? It's that social emotional development, where we learn to become part of something, become part of a community. And that, to me, developing empathy, which,
Hmm.
if you've tumbled a little too hard and you hurt your best friend, the development of empathy, sensitivity, perspective taking, all of those are going to serve you so much better in the future as a successful adult in society than, flashcards.
And so many of those academic skills, I always make it clear, I'm not saying they don't matter, but they need to be in
Right,
their right place, that foundation needs to be full of those social skills. And there are some pieces of, the foundational pieces of literacy that are appropriate in there, but pushing them down doesn't get them any further ahead because of what it's pushing out. And
right,
so those
right.
academic skills are important, and they have their place, and they will be developed, but they'll
They
be learned
will.
so much better when it's on the foundation of these early skills that are built through play.
Yes, but also, as part of the advocacy I do in each of these chapters is to point out the different academic skills that are being
Exactly.
acquired naturally, oh, this is emergent literacy, and this
Uh-huh.
is math, and this is a scientific concept, and we don't tend, we're not looking at it through the right lens.
Mm-hmm.
Although, I mean, I have to say, I've been doing, I've been promoting movement for 44
Decades.
years now. Yeah, yeah.
44 years.
And over those 4 decades, I have resented having to justify movement and play and music, and all the things that serve children so well by saying they promote these academic skills. But it's at the point where, I'll say anything that,
Well, and it's
that,
back to speaking the same language, because it is true. I mean, dramatic play is building pre-literacy skills over and over, right? In a
mm,
million different ways.
yeah,
And it's no less true because it's play.
right.
But sometimes that's the perspective that is going to be most helpful to point out for someone.
Yeah, yeah, the most needed, at least, I think,
Hmm.
in these weird ages that we're living in. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, there was another tricky topic that I really was anxious to hear your perspective on, and that is gunplay. You actually broached the subject of what about gunplay? And so I'm so curious to hear what your suggestions are about how we look at that differently and how we handle it differently in our classrooms, because that is such a charged, difficult
Oh,
topic.
of course it is. I mean, especially, look, just last week or the week before, we had another school shooting. It's a very, very sensitive topic. The fear is, and it's understandable. The fear
Hmm.
is that if we let the children engage in gunplay, they will come to see it as, as gunplay as something that's okay, that is acceptable, that they will become violent. And it's sort of the same worry as with the rough and tumble play,
Hmm.
right? But there is no evidence, no research whatsoever to show that children who engage in gun and war play and superhero play um, become violent. In fact, Stuart Brown, founder of the National Foundation for Play, is that what it's called? Um, he went into prisons and interviewed inmates
Right.
and discovered that the most violent among them never played as children. And
Hmm.
I think in particular they never had rough and tumble play, but Nancy Carlson Page, Diane Levin, a lot of people, Gerard Jones, Jane Katz. I mean, they have all written wonderful, wonderful books on gunplay, superhero play, war play, and it's not anything to worry about. And like rough and tumble play, it's found all over the world in all cultures, I often like to say that you know, this is what children were intended to do. Nature intended them to learn and grow in all these different ways through different kinds of play. And we cannot possibly imagine we have a better plan than nature. If we just give nature credit, we'll be okay.
Well, and I often think back, I have four boys who are
Oh my.
teenagers now, but I remember thinking, even if I took every single toy gun away, there's
Yes.
still this finger, or they put together the blocks, or they find the stick. And even if they don't tell you something's a gun, if they get the idea that a gun is restricted and banned and it'll be taken away, they won't tell you anything's a gun, but they, you know, my peanut
Yeah,
butter and jelly sandwich is a gun. I'm just not going to tell anybody, right? That play,
right.
you can't stop the play. So what do you suggest? What are the boundaries and the guidelines that we should use in the classroom to be able to, because like I said, even if you think you're stopping it, you're probably not stopping it.
Right.
That's not the objective. So if the objective isn't to stop it, what do you suggest teachers do to guide it appropriately?
I do understand not, refusing to have toy guns in the classroom or in the home. I get
Hmm.
that. But as you said, they're going to make them out of carrots and sticks and,
Right.
peanut butter sandwiches. And I think it was Diane Levin who pointed out that when we take them away and they're going to create them anyway, what we're teaching them is to be sneaky. And we certainly aren't looking to do that, are we? Yeah, as soon as we tell them something is forbidden, oh wow, you know how that goes. I think that it's the same sort of thing. If the children are having fun, if they're smiling, if they're laughing, if they're, although, when you're running around playing cops and robbers, it's a very serious thing. I remember doing that as a child. And I think that we just need to go with the flow of it. I know that's easier said than done, but we I'm hoping that knowing there's no research that shows it turns children into, little villains um is going to be enough to calm people
Hmm.
when it comes to that.
And I
Uh,
think like a lot of those challenging types of play, it really comes back to the conversations that we're willing to have and to talk through, if it is going beyond something that becomes more intense, talking again about how are people feeling
yes,
and why do we feel this way and what is it reflecting? Maybe if, whether they're just reflecting the cops and robbers trope, right? Or if they're reflecting something really scary that they need to process and play with and talk about to just say that's not okay isn't going to help them process this
Exactly.
big, heavy thing. And while
Exactly.
that does take a lot of time and effort, I always go back to the line of thinking that essentially either way we're helping them to grow and develop, and that's going to
Yes.
take time. I think it was oh, I'm trying to remember. Just recently I was talking with somebody and they said their favorite saying was um you can either keep putting the cows back in the pasture or you can actually fix the fence. Either way it takes time. You just get to decide where you put the time, right?
Oh,
And
good analogy.
and so we can have that conversation, those hard conversations to talk about what feels safe, what doesn't feel safe, and maybe why they're playing that way, which doesn't mean that it's bad and we're stopping it, but that we're processing it is more
Right.
important. Stopping it
Right.
isn't very productive, but processing it, that's going to
Yes.
be productive.
And setting up protocols ahead of time. We won't hit anyone with our guns, sticks, whatever. Um, eh, you know, th- all the early childhood professionals listening in today know how important it is to set up those boundaries and guidelines and have those
Mhm.
conversations in advance. You know, you mentioned that this is play is how children express their feelings. It's how they process their feelings. And I once heard Nancy Carlson Page say that if they don't have the chance to process those feelings, where do those feelings go?
Mhm.
I mean, during and after the pandemic, children were playing doctor and patient and hospital, and all of these things. And by acting that out, they were taking control of something um, over which they had no control.
Mhm.
They were becoming powerful by taking on those roles, and that power was something they
Mhm.
needed to feel. And the TVs are on in the background, the adults are talking, they get whispers or whatever it might be about these school shootings, and they need to process it somehow. I mean, eh, eh, just Nancy Carlson Page said it best. If we don't allow them to process their feelings through play, then where do those feelings go? And
Mhm.
I don't want to think about, what happens when we suppress our feelings. They're
Right.
going to come out in some unhealthy way at some
Mhm.
point. So, yeah,
And back to your point, that doesn't mean that we're providing, I want to be really clear. It doesn't mean we're providing toy guns in our dramatic play
exactly.
area, but it's
Yep.
saying that if they create it in some way,
Hmm.
we don't immediately,
Shut it
explode
down.
on it and shut it down, right?
Right.
I
Right.
think I think there's a parallel when 9/11 happened. I was teaching in the lab preschool at the university where I was doing my master's degree. And and as I'm sure it happened in many other preschools, we would see children building up towers and knocking
I'm
them
knocking
down,
them down.
building up
I
towers and
wrote
knocking
about
them
that in the
down,
book.
right?
It's
Yeah.
just, yeah, what they had
And
to do.
right. And we would not stop and get in the way of that and say, we're not going to talk about it. We don't want to see it. Right. Even though it could be very upsetting. And it was hard to see.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it was recognizing that even though they didn't understand, just like you said, they didn't understand the full context, they knew enough to know there was something that wasn't right and that they needed to play with that idea to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just think there's a parallel there. There's so many other ways that we let children play with challenging topics and events, and we recognize that we need to help process and work through it. Um, and maybe we just need to take a step back and recognize, are there other types of things that we're shutting down without processing
Yeah. I
that's
mean,
doing a
think of how
disservice?
frightening these things have to be to the little
Hmm.
ones, even without fully understanding the context, as you said. And how little control they have in their lives, and play allows them some control. It allows
Hmm.
them to feel powerful, and they need that. I mean, helplessness, that's not a good feeling.
Right,
It's
right.
not what we want them to experience.
And that play is the developmentally appropriate context for them to practice that type of power and control.
Exactly.
That's where they're
Exactly.
going to get it. Well, you alluded to this earlier, but the last topic I wanted to talk about was how we have these conversations with parents, how we get
Mm.
them on board. And that's something that I do a lot of work with and we've talked a lot about before. But what are some things that you recommend that educators do to help get parents on board with play?
parents are powerful people.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon the alliteration. Because they're receiving so much misinformation, and that earlier is better is a big part of that misinformation. But because, I mean, who is easier to scare than a parent? Because they became so worried, they started advocating and requesting academics oriented programs as opposed to play-based programs. And a lot of play-based programs disappeared as a result of that. If they have the power to take things that way, they have the same power to take them the other way, to
Mm-hmm.
bring play back to early childhood. So, as I mentioned, in each chapter, there is a section, and this was my wonderful editor, her idea, called partnering with parents. And I mean, mostly I'm suggesting that they take the research that I gave them in the chapter. And they're all, they're all little chapters, they're all easy reads.
Uh-huh.
Don't want to overwhelm parents. We don't want to use um, uh, jargon, educational jargon. We want to make it, and I'm not saying we need to talk down to them.
No.
We just want to simplify it as much as we can because they're busy people.
I was going to say for their time as much as anything else.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we can share articles. I mean, there are all these apps these days, right? For sharing information with parents. We can attach an article, or we can do a little bit of work and synthesize it with bullet points. We can put an article in their child's cubby with a note that says, "I thought you'd love to read this article. It's, this great article on play I just came across." Again, we don't want to bombard them with research articles. We can use, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. We can use photos and videos. I believe it was Mike Huber talking about rough and tumble play, who said that he sent home videos of the children engaging in it.
Mm,
And when the parents saw that it was okay, but mostly when they saw how much joy the children were experiencing, the issue just went away.
interesting.
So, yeah, we show them, we can point out those concepts. We can, include a video or a photo and say, here your child is learning about is learning word comprehension, or whatever it might be, the mathematics concepts of quantitative concepts, whatever it is. I'm starting to babble now, but we can help them to see what children are learning
Mm-hmm.
through play. And there are a lot of different possibilities, but it the conversation has to be there. There
Mm-hmm.
has to be that conversation with the parents. It has to be a partnership with them.
Mm-hmm. And when we recognize that what parents really want is whatever is best for
That's
their
for their
children,
children.
then when we help them to understand all these benefits that you mentioned, when we can articulate to them very confidently, but not in a
Pompous.
right, not pompous and not, we're not in a conflict. We're not fighting about it. We're just passionate about it. We're just very confident
Yes.
about it. We're excited about what we're seeing their children do. When we can share it in that enthusiastic way that
Yes,
welcomes them into that partnership that you described, they will start to be the biggest advocates right along with you
they
because they
will.
want what's best for their children. And so when you help
Yes.
them see that, they're on your team, right?
Yes. And you use the word enthusiasm, and like that is the way, that we share what we want to share with them, with enthusiasm, as opposed to coming across like we're the know-it-alls. We know your children better than you do, and we understand child development better than you do. No, we just have to be excited about what we're sharing and
Hmm.
passionate about it. And also, you know, if you love their child, they're going to love you. I
Right.
mean, because who wouldn't love someone who loves their child? So, yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's all about all of us wanting the best for them. So, yeah.
Absolutely. When we can get a lot of us, all of us together, good people with a good message, good things happen, right?
Yes. And there's a whole lot of research now about how important joy is to learning.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Neuroscientist and educator Judy Willis has written about this a lot, and she
Uh-huh.
says, when the fun stops, so too does the learning. And that is never more true than in early
Mm-hmm.
childhood. because fun is what motivates them.
Yes, she is one of my favorite quotes. I think it finds its way into almost every presentation that I do. She has a quote that talks about how joy and enthusiasm are absolutely essential for learning to happen. And then I love she uses these qualifiers literally,
And
scientifically, as a
scientifically,
matter of fact and research. And I
yes.
love those qualifiers. And it's,
I think that's in the book too.
is it?
Judy's great. Yeah.
It's one of my very favorites because it's not, we don't do it just because, well, I always say it's not because it's cute, right? Because that's what I talk
Right.
about. It's not because it's cute. It's not because you're nice or because, you just want to do this fluffy, fun stuff. It's because literally, scientifically, as a matter of fact and research, it's where the best learning happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Rae, thank you so much for your decades of advocacy and for
Oh,
sharing all of your knowledge and your experience and for taking time to talk with us today. You're just such an amazingly prolific treasure. So
oh.
thank you.
Thank you. I'm tired.
You've earned it.
Thanks, Amanda. I always have so much fun talking with you.
It is always a pleasure. Thanks again for listening to Not Just Cute, the podcast. You can find show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 77. There, you'll find links to Rae's book as well as other tidbits that I know that you'll love. You can also hit up the show notes for a link to the Why We Play letters. Head to notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 77, or go straight to notjustcute.com/why we play to get signed up and download your free sample letter. I'm Amanda Morgan. You can read more on my blog and sign up for the Not Just Cute newsletter at notjustcute.com. You can also stay tuned for social media updates on Instagram by following me at Amanda_notjustcute. Thanks for listening today. And as always, thank you for standing up for children and for childhood.